Today, December 16th of 2025, we got a combat styles improvement ranged beta. And without spoiling it too much, I am not very happy with this beta and how it was released. But in order to be fair to it, we're just going to go through point by point and discuss the ideas and implementations in the beta. Now, what I'm going to be doing in this video is I'm going to be going over the blog post essentially, and that's what's going to be up on screen for most of the time. I might pull in some stuff here and there, but essentially this is going to be a kind of just talking video, so you can leave this in the background. You can do whatever you need to do, but this is just going to be essentially a giant talking video. So right now I am on the RuneScape main website, and here we have the news section, and it says right here, combat style improvements, ranged beta. So we'll click on it, and we are brought to this blog post, and it has a decent amount of length going through a bunch of different stuff, and we're going to go through all of this individually. And I think the best place to start here is the goals. So it says here, melee, magic, and ranged are long-standing combat styles built upon years of mismatched design patterns, legacy systems, and bloated ability kits, leaving much to be desired in terms of gameplay identity, early to mid-game power, accessibility, overall structure, and visual fidelity. What does this actually mean in normal terms? It essentially means the combat styles have been out for a long time, different people have made adjustments and adaptations to it, additions to it, and whatnot, and currently it is just a steaming pile of garbage that happens to be working at a high DPM level, so people kind of ignore it. And by ignore it, I mean ignore all of the problems with it. As a result, we are looking to modernize and improve the game's 3 original combat styles in the following ways: removal of threshold ability types and move to abilities like necromancy. Personally, I already heavily disagree with this, but we'll just keep going. Styles increase to 120 max level. I also disagree with this coming into game, but we'll get into that later. Create and embrace clear style identities in the combat styles. This point I can understand, you want the styles to feel a little bit different, but pursuing this as a main goal can definitely lead to some sacrifices in actual gameplay quality in the pursuit of actually trying to maintain a unique identity. They want to reduce the ability count and remove redundant or rarely used options, which I don't think was too much of an issue with ranged. There were some dead content abilities, but we'll get into what exactly has been removed. Now, something I'm not completely sure on, or whether I agree with on this point, is if having someone build up muscle memory with a couple of inputs and then adding more and more, if you're taking tens of hours to get through this progress and you're building up that muscle memory and you have to unlearn certain muscle memory to then learn new muscle memory, this is a very difficult thing to pull off, and I have my solutions and what I think would be good for giving the new players options, but that gets addressed a little bit further down in here. And they want to do some animation cleanup and flow and whatnot. If they're talking like visual clarity and stuff like that, fair enough. And here they're talking about what they visualize for range being its own identity of a bunch of multi-hitting attacks and on-hit effects, such as procs from special attacks and enchanted bolts. It kind of already does that with its ability set. I don't really see why we need a whole beta for this, but I guess they're trying to remove other stuff. And they say they want to embrace this multi-hitting identity at the core and introduce built-in payoffs that reinforces gameplay, which to me completely screams out building up stacks and cashing them in, which is just a copy paste from necromancy, but maybe that's a bit different. We'll see what they do in the future. Now, they do say that the balance here is experimental and it's to try and get the feeling right, and I can ignore the actual DPM figures inside of a beta, and I'm focusing just on the core logic of their changes and how it feels to use. This point right here I'm fine with, where it talks about everything hitting at the same time no matter what. They were able to clean it up so we don't have blowpipe causing things to hit one tick sooner when you're melee distance to something. Range basics generating 9% instead of 8%, so you can get to 10% with FOTS if you want to run that. Essentially, we're just getting Fury of the Small for free, so it is what it is there. No one really runs FOTS. I don't really notice a difference on any style if I get an extra percent of adrenaline. So as long as it's maybe consistent with the other styles, sure, but I feel like this is kind of just doesn't really matter change. The usage of ammo on all abilities is interesting. I guess they want us to consume more arrows and incur more cost, but they want to keep it balanced, so it is what it is. I guess it makes sense that, you know, you're shooting a bunch of arrows, you're probably not going to be able to go pick them up. Here they raise the combat styles to 120. And they say they disabled Zerk, Maniacal, Reckless, and Majrat auras. And this I don't really understand a whole lot, because they disable Reckless, but Range hasn't been using Reckless aura for at least 3 years. It's already been a moot point. No one's really proccing this anymore. Majrat is strong, but so is Supreme Invigorate and Inspiration. And I see Inspiration get used in quite a few range mage builds because of its ability to hit spam. And I don't think we really need to be raising everything to 120 combat and just getting a big novelty damage buff for no reason. If more power creep is going to come into game, which, yes, you're taking away 5% damage, but you're raising the combat level to 120, so your overloads are now boosting you to level 145. It's an immense amount of damage completely for free that we haven't earned through any form of skill expression. If they change formulas in the background so that way damage numbers kind of line up and DPM metrics don't get sent even further into the sun than we already are at, then I could see this working out. But personally, I'm not the biggest fan of combat styles going to 120. Now, this all pales in comparison, and I'm really gonna dig into these abilities because most of these changes I'm just really not a fan of. I don't think they're good. There's a couple in here that are fine, but we're just gonna go through it. And now Range has a basic attack. And so what they're trying to do is essentially turn Ranged into Necromancy, where you have a lot less basics. You have one basic that you just kind of mindlessly spam and then pick the other ones. I've disliked this design of Necromancy from the start, and I don't think Range has really had too much of a basic ability problem. The basics that they did get rid of, like Fragmentation Shot, actually have some nice uses in certain circumstance, and they're not just like an omnipress. But I do not want to see the combat triangle go down this path of the having a basic attack and picking other things kind of just randomly. I find it odd that they want to give abilities purpose and make you go through a decision-making process, but then going and just simplifying to a basic attack and reducing the number of abilities that you have to pick between. So that way you're not really picking between abilities for certain situations. It's just a like weird horseshoe way to get back to the same issue of we just press buttons for the best damage. There is no real decision-making process. And with how Range has been currently designed, I don't really see this as being too much of an issue. If anything, Melee is the combat style that has a lot of filler abilities that don't really have purpose or anything like that. I've never really had that complaint about Range. The complaint I've always had about ranged combat is its gear design is abysmal, and the only reason people still enjoy this style is because of the damage it does. But the gear design, item design, everything relating about all the things and equipment you buy for this style, that is the part that really needs some reworking and retuning. Not so much the ability set. Snapshot has been rebalanced and it's now the simple spender. This is apparently just a ability version of Zamibo EOF, so maybe they're trying to reduce the number of EOFs here, or before you get into range with all the EOFs, you have kind of just a spammable double hit ability. And they gave it no cooldown, which is an interesting concept. I'm not entirely against this idea. If this is an intention to be used in the early to mid game, I could see this being fine. But overall, on the best and slot side of things, it feels pretty redundant because I'm probably not going to be pressing Snapshot more than once in a DS anyways, because there are just significantly better things to press for the adrenaline. Now, in the last DPS guide I did, I talked about Snipe a bit and how it's not really a worthwhile press, but it can be. They essentially just cranked the damage up to the maximum to try and make it feel like a strong ability. And in that guide release, I made a comparison about how Bombardment is so terrible to use because it costs a Dren in and does the same thing that a snipe would do damage-wise. And with these two abilities, they have not addressed the core issue with them. The core issue with snipe is not really its damage value. It's the fact that it takes 4 ticks to use, and most people are just not going to use that because it's not worth wasting the extra tick. All they really had to do for snipe was make it hit on tick 3, so that way it keeps the flow of range going. Having one ability that you only wait 1 tick extra to charge with really breaks up the flow of ranged combat, where everything you're pressing is on global cooldown or in combination with the global cooldown. And even though they rebalanced bombardment and say it's been rebalanced to have a better payoff in AoE scenarios, they made it cost more adrenaline for more damage, but in the beta it's 300 to 330%, whereas snipe is 300 to 360. So the balance between these two abilities is the same as in the main game, and nothing has changed. Bombardment is still a terrible press in the combat beta. You do not want to press it for AoE. You are much better off pulling out some chins and pressing snipe and gaining adren rather than spending 40% adrenaline on bombardment. And that's the thing that really annoyed me, is when I started reading through this list, I started realizing more and more they're not addressing the core design problems with range. They're doing a bunch of random changes to abilities that really didn't need to have changes on them, and just ignore the gear side entirely and the gear balance entirely. Now, I don't know if this beta is going to keep going on and they're still going to keep adjusting it in order to go through the gear, or if this is only on the ability set, but so far this does not give me any hope, and it proves to me that they're not able to address core issues within the ability set and just change things that sound good. It almost feels like they've learned nothing from the past couple of years of combat tweaks and changes. It is what it is. Bombardment is still a terrible button press even when it gets buffed to the moon, and you're better off using something like chins with snipe. Piercing shot is essentially the same, but instead of making it just kind of like the de facto spammable ability, they brought in the basic attack. So now piercing shot is a 5.4 second cost basic, and the damage on piercing shot beforehand, I even mentioned this in the guide, it was terrible. It was nice as a filler ability to try and gain adrenaline and maintain a nice number of stacks, so that way your EOFs would line up nicely with Bolg and whatnot. We weren't pressing this for any sort of effect, and they made it to where it's 5.4 seconds, but it reduces snipe's cooldown, but snipe still feels like a terrible ability because it's ruining the flow of ranged combat. Again, these are building on the core problems of range without addressing the core problems at all. Now, one of the changes that I'm kind of 50-50 on here after rereading it and refreshing myself, Ricochet has lost its AoE effect, instead leaning in on what made Greater Ricochet great. Now always applies multiple hits to the target, simplified the damage reduction per hit portion from the previous Greater Ricochet. And I think the simplest thing here is keep Gricko working exactly as it was intended to use, especially with its AoE effect. It's nice for pulling in mobs or gaining aggro on stuff, but just make the standard Ricochet work like Greater Ricochet. It's just significantly less damage. I don't think you need to change about its AoE and whatnot and how that works. Now, they came out with a new ability called Splinter Shot, and essentially this is a button press that is 1 global cooldown, and it's like a stronger version of the Frostblade's passive. And what this does is applies a flat 696 damage to any ability you fire within its 40-second window, and it has a 40% adren cost. I think this ability is incredibly unimaginative. I think it's lazy, and it doesn't need to be an ability. It is quite literally a set and forget. You press it once, you have your buff for the next 40 seconds of essentially 700 damage tacked on to every ability you do. Something like this, I would say, would be a good aspect, because then you have to choose between, do you want the darkness dodging effect, which is very strong for range using things like split soul and already struggling with damage intake, or do you go for the more damage option but play a bit more risky? I think this idea idea needs to be an aspect. It should not be an ability. I think ability should have some type of interaction. It should not be a set and forget. I already went over bombardment, but again, it's just don't press this ability in the game, in the beta, ever. Just bring something that does AoE, whether that's a Desi, EOF, or Chins, and just avoid this entirely. Rapid fire is pretty much the same, but it does more damage if you have Splinter Shot, and they kind of made this interaction here. Again, I don't think Splinter Shot should be an ability. I think it should be an aspect. And something I should probably explain how this works. A lot of people will look at the Frostblade passives or the Splinter Shot passive and see a 25 or 30% damage increase when it's active and think it's like half or 2/3 of a Death Swiftness. The percentage in parentheses on that tooltip is kind of misleading. The percentage inside of the parentheses is a misleading figure because how this actually calculates is it takes whatever number it says. For Frostblades, I think it's 538, and for this one, it's 696. It takes that number and just adds it to whatever the hit was supposed to be. So there is a large diminishing return for the more damage a single hit splat does. For example, if you're pressing a ability that does 1000 damage and you have this active, it would then be 1696 damage. And that is quite the increase for an ability that hits a low amount. But if you flip it around and then something hits a 15k, it's only going to be 15,696. So the higher the base damage is, the more of a diminishing return when it comes to damage increase. Whereas if you had a 15k and you had a 30% damage increase on that ability, you would almost be hitting 20,000 damage. Again, this should be an aspect, not an ability. Deadshot is the only change that I actually just flat out enjoy. I don't really have any issues with it. Basically, it is just a ginormous Omni power where it hits 5 times instantly and they completely got rid of the bleed. And honestly, fair enough. I think this one is fine for Deadshot. It now feels like it actually belongs inside of a Death Swiftness rather than as a filler ability in between Death Swiftness. Now here they say they want to change Incendiary Shot, but they haven't yet because they have some things they like and they don't like about it. And this is where I've really started to realize that whoever was doing this beta test doesn't seem to quite grasp the actual concepts and what makes combat good, because the methodology in which they tackle the issues they're bringing up just doesn't really make sense to me. So here they say the positive is we like players having access to big adrenaline swings, but then down here they're saying, oh, well, we actually just want it to be you're gaining adrenaline based off of per hit as a suggestion or an idea. So to me, these are already counterproductive to each other. And then further down, they say we don't like each style's adrenaline swing being tied to critical strikes, which they claim it doesn't necessarily line up with the combat style's core identity. But this is one of the fundamental issues I have with this entire beta, is that critical strikes are just a thing that certain combat styles can pick up as their entire identity, and other styles don't get as much access to because it doesn't fit their identity. When in reality, critical strikes is one of the main tenets of combat in RuneScape. This isn't something that some styles are going to gravitate towards as a identity you can pull from. This is a major pillar of PVM in RuneScape. And so I very much disagree with this suggestion of they don't like it being tied to critical strikes, because that is a fundamental change we have made in this game, and I believe it's for the better. Now, for those who are listening, I don't know how long y'all have been playing RuneScape for, but I have been playing this game essentially since 2013. I did play RuneScape before that, but it was very spotty, and it was when I was very young. Basically mid 2013 till current day, I have seen all of the different PVM iterations. And back in the day, it was very much, all right, we're going to optimize the rotation for Under Sunshine, and then you press the same exact buttons over and over and over again. And back then it was fine because the community was still pretty green to the whole optimization of combat idea. We had some really good PVMers back then, but the knowledge base was so infinitesimally small when it came to combat knowledge back then compared to what we know about the game now. And if we didn't make this fundamental change a while ago to tying styles to critical strikes and gaining adrenaline from critical strikes, the combat would have been so utterly boring at this point that who knows where the game would have been. The random crits, which can be somewhat streamlined with things like Calg and other buffs and things like that, having that requirement to be able to improv and press what's correct at the certain point in time, I think that is a very important skill expression to have, but being able to do this and have this improv nature explodes the skill ceiling in game and essentially makes it infinite. And it allows some players to express how truly good they are at this game. Now here they also say we don't like each style adrenaline swing being tied to an AoE ability. I had an idea for this before, but this bullet point right here is a perfect opportunity to include one of the best ability designs to ever come into this game. Any top PVMer will tell you that they love how the gameplay works around the two abilities of Resonance and Divert. They share a cooldown, but you can choose whether you want to gain more health back or if you want to gain adrenaline back. And you could take that same ability relationship and apply it directly to the crit buffing ultimates. You could introduce something known as Arson Shot that doesn't have any of the critical strike chance, or maybe a heavily reduced version of critical strike chance increase, but it essentially adds like Chin-Sen levels of AoE damage back. So instead of picking Incendiary Shot, which then could be reworked into just a single target, single hit ability that works exactly the same, you branch off of that ability, make something that looks similar icon wise, and then that is just the strong AoE version of Incendiary Shot. You could do the same thing with Tsunami and Meteor Strike, essentially making versions of ultimates that are just insane AoE damage. I mean, like big time AoE damage, but it causes the other ability to go on cooldown because they're tied to each other. So you're keeping that really fun decision making process of where you are in a boss fight and which one you need at the time, while avoiding this problem of the critical strike chance buff being tied to an AoE. Now here they talk about the Corrupt Shot and essentially how it's one of the stronger single targets, but it also has good AoE potential, and they're not really sure what to do. They want to make it different from Corrupt Blast. I feel like this is not really worth the time of exploring, with so many other issues being in ranged, that this is definitely something that's like a, if you have the extra time, go ahead and maybe explore this, but honestly, it's probably not worth it. And then this final point about lesser abilities. I don't believe that getting rid of lesser abilities and using this methodology of giving you one button press, then two, then three, and so on and so forth, I don't think that is the best way to educate people into learning combat as they level up their character. I think if you took the lesser ability model, so say you had 3 or 4 tiers that were leading up to the full power ability, and you did this inside of a talent tree where you're unlocking points as you gain levels in the combat skill with good concise information on screen and letting you pick and choose between upgrade paths, you'll still unlock the full value out of the system. But I think having an upgrade path and having a dedicated educational portion inside of that would be a much better way to give people a good trajectory to get into the end game content, and it allows people to build muscle memory from start. People will argue that overloading someone on start, that if there's too many button presses, they're just gonna give up. And maybe you could incorporate a version of both where by say level 10 or something like that, or level 15, something pretty early on that you're gonna hit within the first say hour of gameplay, you have unlocked all of the base levels, like the level 1 version of all abilities. And so you could take that, you could combine both of these ideas and then let them really start building up the muscle memory that's going to be very impactful later on. And then at the bottom of this news post, they put some known issues and changing all of this. Now, something they didn't put in this news post that also got me pretty annoyed is they deleted quite a few abilities. But I'll go ahead and bring up the main game here. I was just chopping some Elder Trees or Eternal Magics. I'll go over here real quick and tell you about the abilities they actually removed. So they got rid of Greater Dazing Shot and Dazing Shot in general. They got rid of Fragmentation Shot. They got rid of Shadow Tendrils and Tight Bindings. And seeing that these were the abilities that got selected to get the can really tells me that whoever was doing this combat beta either just doesn't play with the combat style much, or has a good grasp on how everything is, or where the real problems lie with this combat style. Because Greater Dazing Shot is a perfectly fine ability. I guess they wanted to try and make it to where you have your basic attack, and then you have like Piercing Shot, you have Binding Shot, Corrupt Shot, and then Greater Ricochet. But Frag Shot is a nice and useful ability. It synergizes well with Split Soul because of how Split Soul calcs. I guess the reason they wanted to get rid of Dazing Shot is because they're trying this whole basic attack approach, but again, I just detest the basic attack in general, at least as an idea. And the thing that really sold me on this idea is getting rid of Tight Bindings, because it's not a good button press, but that's only because we don't really use flanking anymore, because no one wants to buy flanking bulgs. And also getting rid of Shadow Tendrils, which is like one of the better range thresholds we have. It is a staple in ranged combat. It's a very fun interaction because range plays on the idea of sacrificing your healing potential in order to get out more damage, and having a threshold that damages you while getting big damage out in return. It really forces you to really pick and choose when you're doing that and play the game correctly, so that way you don't fall over when pressing it, but the reward is you get a lot of damage out. All right, I think I've ranted long enough about this beta. The only takeaway I honestly would pull from this beta and implement into the game is the change to Deadshot, and maybe look at how Ricochet and Greater Ricochet works. But other than that, I would either want to see these things get significantly reworked or scrapped entirely. Like, again, Splinter Shot should be an aspect. It shouldn't be an ability that causes a global cooldown, or maybe it could cost a global cooldown, but that's a set and forget that you would do at a bank. And I think the biggest source of confusion with this entire beta is we don't know the big picture ideas of what they actually want to do, because it seems like without the context of, do they want hybrid combat to stay in game? Do they want ability stalling to stay in game? What do they want to do with pre-building? It's the classic Jagex thing of sort of giving half answers and being kind of secretive with what their big plans are on big topics like that, and then just put out these sorts of random changes that we can't tell which goals they're trying to align with or not, and we have to sit here and play this guessing game. Overall, I give this combat beta as it sits and as it came into the game a 1 out of 10. Again, Deadshot's the only thing I really like from it. Everything else I think should just be completely scrapped. And yeah, that's all I really have to say on that.